So, yeah.
Hey, Grand
Hello,
Rising.
Grand Rising.
Jeff,
Yep.
Grand Rising, everyone.
All right.
October the 3rd, Thursday. Thanks for joining us this morning. Hope everyone's feeling good. You're healthy, got good energy, ready to get the day started. Well, at least here. It's 9 a.m. here. But how are you today, Jeff?
I'm all right. I'm doing okay. So I have to be, right? Got to get
Yep.
up and make stuff happen.
That's right. That's right. So what do we got going on? What have we got going on with the planets?
Well, all kinds of stuff. A lot of people have been asking about this second moon, this asteroid that's entered into the Earth's atmosphere. Apparently, this happened right around September 29th. I haven't been directly tracking it, but it's going to keep going on all the way up until the 25th of November. And then, apparently they brought it in just to skew the voting machines. No, I'm just kidding, just kidding. But it's apparently in the orbit, and I don't know all the details, but it is pretty significant because it's like trapped in Earth's orbit. And this kind of stuff has happened before. We get asteroids passing by, and there's a lot of different theories like how does this tie into astrology? Does it affect us? I know years ago I studied a lot about asteroids and the asteroid belt, of course, which is between Jupiter and Mars. And there is a lot to it. The problem is there's a lot of detail. So I ended up just sticking with traditional astrology and Vedic and Nadi astrology, which really is the interaction on the soul. But when you look at how complex this world is and all the stuff that goes on, there's clearly a lot of variables that come into this solar system. It's actually miraculous when you start studying astronomy in comparison to astrology. It's really because the two are one and the same. In fact, prior to the 1700s, astronomy was astrology, or you could say astrology was astronomy, whichever one you want to say. And that's what they called it. In fact, Guido Bonatti in the 1100s, instead of putting out a book on astrology, it was called the Book of Astronomy. And you'll find most of your medieval, all the way back to the Egyptian times, usually referred to it as astronomy, because that's what it is. So all these bodies definitely have an effect. Another thing I want to mention that's really huge, and right now scientists are warning about this huge violent solar flare that's going on. Apparently it's AR 3664, whatever the numbers are, and it's called an X-class solar flare. And they said it was like 3.8 before. Now they're expecting it to be close to an X12. And they're watching it between now and apparently the end of the week. They're really quite concerned about it, or I should say the weekend. It's between now and the 8th, so it could be up to 5 days. And apparently, from what I understood, it may not be facing Earth directly, which is a good thing. It's a coronal mass ejection, which is huge. And again, I've always said, the stars, I think, are portals. And science is always grappling with, okay, all these measurements of, X-class rays and all these gamma rays and magnetics, which are definitely there. But it's interesting when you look at these stars, there's a lot of theories about what they are. And again, my opinion is they're portals to the upper heavens because the immense amount of power in them is just stunning. And especially our sun, go stand in front of it sometime. And to the flat earthers, I always say, if you think it's an LED or some kind of a ball put up there, just stand in the sun for a few minutes and let me know how you feel. So it's pretty powerful, and it certainly is life-giving to everything. Nothing would exist without the sun. So these huge effects, they're actually called grand solar maximums and minimums. And I watched a video on this, which is really cool, and I actually have it up here. I'm going to take just a second, just play you a couple of the various different um, clips on here, which I thought was really, really amazing. And I'll just scrub through it. You can see this is the solar flares, and they're huge. And they can really, and there's the number, the AR364. And they talk about how this could really have a huge effect on communications and also many different elements of the power grid, so on and so forth. So it's really pretty big, and I don't want to go through all this, but it talks about all these magnetic effects on the Earth, and there's a kind of a cool picture there where the Earth is being hit with all these magnetics. So we are definitely in that right now, and not to dwell and watch this whole video, but it is a pretty interesting phenomenon. And when you think about what is happening, astronomy slash astrology wise, it's almost beyond comprehension when you really look at the diversity of things that are happening in the solar system. Astrologers pretty much stick to the 9 planets, right? If you're a modern astrologer, if you're a Vedic astrologer, you're going to stick with pretty much the 7 planets, right? Which are very effective at showing daily life. But then you look at the crazy phenomena that goes on in this world, everything from ufology to spirituality to paranormal stuff. There's a lot going on here, and there always has been. And I think it's almost beyond our ability to fully comprehend. But I can tell you these solar flares are a big deal. And I've been noticing a lot of people have been saying to me, I feel a little bit off and really tired. That's these solar flares. And again, they call them grand solar minimums and maximums. Approximately every 11 years, the sun flips its magnetic poles, which is very unusual when you think about that. And they say the solar flares that are going on right now are really large. And if one is facing the Earth, it's much more severe. And again, look at this last hurricane. Now, I know a lot of people are saying, it was directed energy weapons, so on and so forth. Maybe it was. I didn't look into that. But one thing's for sure, we are definitely feeling a lot of strange energy right now. And I'm not so sure that with all the scientific monitoring data and also, maybe some spiritual insight that a lot of the elites don't know about this stuff, not to get into the conspiratorial realms, but interesting stuff. So back down a little bit closer to regular astrology, today we've got a moon trining Jupiter, which is good. But that's going to be over with really soon. Pacific time, that'll be over with 11:40 a.m. So we're talking like in 40 something minutes here, within the hour, it's going to be over. If you're on the East Coast or on the other side of the world, extrapolate accordingly. But those are always positive energies. And again, we're in a waxing moon. And I had mentioned last podcast, really significant time. Why? Because there is 6 new moons, they're called lunations, between the spring equinox, which is also known as when the Passover begins, to the fall equinox. Now, many people in Judaism will recognize this as the high holidays. Rosh Hashanah just started yesterday on the new moon, right? That's sundown. And the interesting thing is, this is a very ancient practice of knowing, and I mentioned this before, when the Rosh Hashanah holiday happens, this was when the ancient prophets or saints or rabbis would have the guardian angel come to them and actually teach them how to control the evil spirits. So this is a really sacred and powerful time of the year. And this kind of also dovetails into the things that I was talking about before. We have the Hindu holidays, we have the Druid holidays, where this time of year was always known as a special time of year when the astral worlds and the physical worlds were very close together. And look what we've got going on in the world again. And Uranus is exciting this whole, energy in the Pleiades. So this is a very powerful time. I was mentioning for years, I thought from 2020 forward was really when we were going to see the world change. And the last time we had astronomy like this, or astrology, was in the 1700s, the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, which is when we had what we call a great conjunction of Saturn and the Jupiter. And that happens every 20 years, but it only happens in very special conditions almost every 1,000 years. Well, in 2020, we had the Saturn-Jupiter conjunction on the winter solstice, which is called a mutation conjunction. You might say, well, what does that mean? Well, that is a huge, approximately every 200 to 240 years. It's about 240-ish. It's not exact because we deal in years. Astronomy deals in cycles of planets. But whenever this happens, the world changes. And when COVID broke out, we had the Saturn-Pluto conjunction. And speaking of astrology and astronomy, I think Uranus quite potentially going through this Pleiades might be having some kind of correlated effect to these huge solar flares that are going on in the sun. Even though they might not be directly correlated, I think they're interacting as to why this is such a volatile, dynamic time. And again, I hope we don't see the Middle East come more apart. I mean, Iran is not going to win against Israel. Israel has nuclear weapons. But I think if Iran gets a nuclear weapon, we could see something really dangerous here. And also, too, this whole situation with NATO and Russia is a very dangerous time right now. And let's hope nothing happens because it could. It really could. We have Uranus sweeping over this area of the Pleiades that I've been mentioning for the next 7 years. So very, very dangerous time. In fact, the last time it happened, I went back and researched, was actually closer to about 80 something years ago. And it's actually closer to 90, actually, right when Hitler was coming into power and all this stuff was happening, right in the late 30s, early 1940s, was right when Uranus was beginning its sojourn like it is now. So we're kind of in a brewing stage. Let's hope that the power of the weaponry will keep everybody from not doing it because it's almost like no one would win, when you really look at it.
Yeah, no one
So,
would win. And when you think about spiritually how we all come from one essence, right? Nobody is winning. We're all, everything we're doing is affecting another, every single thing. So
yep.
it's not just this little individual thing. I had a question, Jeff, when you were just now talking about astronomy and astrology. We've talked about this before a little bit, but I wonder why there's always been this clash between astrologers and astronomers when astrology is astronomy.
Well, I don't think there ever always was this clash. I think this clash came in when the age of reason and science started, which interestingly enough was that Saturn Jupiter conjunction, Darwinianism and Newton and all these things. In fact, Newton was an astrologer. He actually was very into it. So was Galileo. Of course, that's not reported in the history books, but I can actually show you documents that prove that. And what's interesting is they were very much, even C.S. Lewis draw a lot of conclusions that many of these ancient so-called scientists were very into astrology. C.S. Lewis himself was all about astrology. He wrote a lot about it. In fact, Narnia, there's all kinds of correlations in many of his books. Also Lord of the Rings too, Tolkien. They were actually friends. Tolkien and C.S. Lewis used to hang out at a pub, and they would correspond a little bit on some of their writings and spiritual things. But that's a great question because ever since science came in, this is when you've seen the divisions, and I can actually see why. I mean, you're literally sitting here with scientific instruments, and you're measuring coronal mass ejections. You're measuring all these different types of particles and rays. You're looking at physics and quantum physics, and it's so different from astrology. I mean, astrology now has divided off into these subjective interpretations of the motions of the planets in this zodiac. And of course, tropical zodiacs are always challenged because they say it's not correct. Well, it actually is to the solstices and equinoxes, but it isn't when it comes to the sidereal positions because we're precessioning around this central sun. So science has its points. So does astrology. See, scientists, if you say to a scientist, Jupiter has an effect on the life force energy of this planet, they're going to look at you and go, what? They're going to say it has this massive gravity. They're all linear left brain thinking in terms of science, which has a lot of validity. In some ways, I feel like Sybil. I have a split personality because I really respect the scientists and I love science. And that was the dichotomy I had getting into quote unquote astrology in the 70s with my mother. I'm like, wait a minute. I'm studying electronics and music and all this scientific stuff. You can't tell me that the planets are going to have some effect on daily life. And then when she would show me, and these cycles that I was going through or cycles that someone else that I knew was going through, and I'm going, wow, and it's almost to the day or definitely really close in time periods. And, like I've told stories where I've had parents with children who've had really severe problems with their children at school. And they would consult me and say, "Do you see anything in the astrology?" Right. And I'd go, "Yeah, I do. And it's going to, change here or get better or get worse here." And it does. And the psychiatrists and the counselors are all going, "Well, it's gotten better." So this is a real dichotomy is science, which has so much validity. I mean, we're all running around now with, cell phones. We can track our kids, we can track each other. It's stunning, the modern world. And I was just listening to a guy on a podcast, Jack Krause, who's a doctor, who's reporting about all this technology that was developed in the 50s and the 60s that by DARPA and everything else that's coming out now. It's all these screens that we stare at every day. Um, and the game, folks, is for your mind. And that the stuff we talk about the lower conscious mind, meaning the nefesh, this is where astrology works, and it's also where mind control works. And I think when we look at astrology and science and this whole crazy, society that's coming at us at the speed of light, literally, life is changing. I mean, when I think about my childhood and your childhood, and so many people who are, I'm still a baby boomer, right? So born in the late 50s. And so the bottom line is people growing up today, it's such a different world. They're all staring at screens. Everybody is going like this, right? I mean, everybody is going like this wherever you go. So it's such a different world today. And the game is really towards your mind, and I just had the blessings of a lot of the guys that I met when I was younger, my 20s and 30s. They were all old, they were all in their 60s, 70s, and 80s. And the mindset was so different than today. And, this whole age of linearism, or you could say science, really started. It began in the 1700s, and then it raced into play during the 18 and 1900s. And it's really shown by the astrology, the astrological cycles. And the book I always quote is The Astrology of the World. Abu Mashar and all these are astrologers back from the second, third, fourth, fifth centuries. And actually, some of them were as early as 100 BC, 100 BC and earlier, where they had talked about these cycles. And how did they know about this without telescopes, without all this, technical stuff that we have today? Well, I believe it was communicated by angels, and many of them have said so. We could call them extraterrestrials, angels, etc. But this is a really great subject you're bringing up, and that is, logic and science, because we see the power of technology. We see what's going on. I mean, my grandmother was telling me she remembers the first car coming by the farm, and this is like in the 1920s. And, the steam engines going into Chicago. And she went to the Chicago School of Art in the 20s. She said, you saw the cars and the horses and buggies going together. So, the world has changed, and it's going to really change. This is what I was saying. I was on Coast to Coast a number of years ago, and I said 220 is the time of change for this world. We are now in an acceleration that's going to be so huge over the next couple of hundred years. And I think that spirals back into who are we as spiritual beings having a physical experience. Because look at how many people, I talk to so many parents whose children are dying from drugs, fentanyl. And there's so much power now to get the mind. It's all about the mind. Every single one of us are staring at computer screens all day long. It's how we make a living. And the few people who have jobs that are actually out in the sunshine, I kind of envious of the gardeners. They're out there cutting trees in the sun. That's why I just cherish my motorcycle, because it gets me out in the sun and the wind and the action. And it's so important for us to keep in touch with the grounding of this earth, because this earth is really sacred. It's such an amazing place. I was really blessed to grow up in the woods in northern Wisconsin, which is absolutely gorgeous. And the whole vibration of nature is so important. You grew up in the asphalt jungle, and you turned out really well for
Yes,
that, Ella.
I
I'll give you
did.
that.
Well, thanks.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, maybe that's one of the reasons why I'm always looking for nature because I didn't grow up with any of that around me. There were a few trees, but that was about it. But Krishnamurti always talks about take yourself out to nature. Get every
So
day if you
important.
can. A park,
So important.
go on a hike, wherever. If there's a park nearby, it's so important. And another thing he always spoke to, which I try to remind myself all the time, and it really shifts your thinking. He spoke to when you see something in nature, don't label it because right away, if we see a bird, oh, we see a finch, oh, that's a finch. He speaks to how it takes away from the interaction you can truly have with that finch, or that's this kind of a tree. Try not to label anything in nature
He's so
and
right.
just
He's so right. See,
experience it.
this is see, human beings are always trying to deduce everything into a logic deductive reasoning, and which is great. I mean, look at AI. Look at where we're going. It's interesting how good the Terminator movies were, because that is absolutely a possibility. When you think about what's going on right now with the unleashment of this extremely powerful computer acceleration. I mean, I know I've seen it. When you start getting, our computers use a whole different type of code. When you start getting into some of the basic codes, there's many different languages. I mean, they are really fast, and the amount of computing power you can do when it comes into like controlling robots and all this. And then you get into the artificial intelligence, which is really going to become so powerful over the next 10, 15 years. Those movies are not an unrealistic uh, outcome if we're not very, very careful. And I think this might be humanity's lesson to spirituality and sacredness, because what I love about stuff we talk about, which is Dr. Carl Wickland's books, the 30 Years Among the Dead, the Magus of Strovolos, and some of the work that the psychiatrists have done, nobody dies. Nobody dies. We certainly exit the physical body known as death, but we don't die. Consciousness is not localized to the body. That's proven by all the out-of-body experiences, OBEs, NDEs, right? Whatever label you want to put on it. But there is astral travel, healing work. You do healing work, I've done healing work. And I mean, it's just really so powerful to realize that you're not your left brain. The more you try and figure everything out, the more we tend to screw it up sometimes, even though modern society has brought us an amazing thing. I mean, just think of what life would be like without basic things like water, sewage, and power, let alone our vehicles and the homes that we live in. We're very protected from nature. So there's a lot of benefits to modern society. And that's the dichotomy, as we see this, huge acceleration of technology. I mean, look what's happening with the longshoremen strike right now. They're afraid of losing their jobs. Not that I'm defending either side here, but it's a big issue because they feel automation is going to come in and push them out of a job. And this is the whole human race is in a potential, dichotomy with this as we move forward in life. I mean, we're pretty soon it's going to be, this is why the new one world orders want to eliminate 3/4 of the human race, because there's just too many of us. Well, life is magic. And I always say the earth is where spirit manifests. And it is. I don't care if you're a human, an animal, an alien, or a plant, or whatever, I mean, a mineral. This is where spirit concretizes into matter, which is stunning. It's really stunning. And Krishnamurti, you're so right to bring him up, and many others, Eckhart Tolle. It's all about this right here, our conscious awareness. If they can keep us in fear, and we get trapped in this loop of reincarnation here, which if we're free and we're conscious, that's okay. But if we're in the bondage of these horrible karmas that a lot of us get in, it's not. And that's where astrology, again, I have to say, I have great respect for science. I used to teach electronics and physics, and I have great respect for it. Anybody who studies electronics and physics immediately is going to go, wow, this universe is stunning and is repeatability. But now you enter into astrology. It's like, well, wait a minute. You can't repeat that. I can't make an aspect in a person's chart happen again. Well, the inner ones you can, but the outer transits and the extremely complex configurations may only happen once in a lifetime. And when you get into what we call primary directions, which is like solar arcs or doshas, which is in the Vedic astrology, and progressions in the Nadi astrology, you can't make this up. The Earth is a time machine. If you look at secondary progressions, which trust me, I don't know how they figured this out without angelic or some extraterrestrial input. This is thousands of years ago. They knew that when a child was born, every cycle of the daily cycles of the earth and the yearly cycles around the sun, as well as the moon and all the other planets, equaled a year. Every single day equals a year. So if you live for the next 100 days after a child's born and you live to 100, that's where all the planets are. 100 days after you're born equals 100 years. If you live to 60, if you live to 90, whatever you live to, those planets were actually playing themselves out within the first 100 days. If you live longer than 100, then it's longer than that. So like your grandmother did, 112. I can't believe that. But the bottom line is it's a time machine. And that's what really struck me. And again, it was my mother. My mom was really smart. She was the one who goes, Jeff, look what's going on. This person is going through this crisis. And it's exactly when these transits and progressions were happening. Well, that's science. You see, science has to agree. That's why I love Dr. Claude Swanson. He was such a great guy, and he died way too young. And his books, The Synchronized Universe, was amazing because what he was proving is that science doesn't have the ability to measure spirit yet, or all these etheric energies. Now you go back to the sunspots, you go back to the second moon in the Earth's atmosphere, all this stuff, or Earth's orbit, and all these phenomena that are going on in the celestial movements, including the incredible precessions of the equinoxes every 26,000 years. It's actually 25,700 or 900 if you split hairs, but it's a long time. These are the great ages. You really have to enter soul into this and spirit, because we're in, like I say, the soul cauldron, and it's like a big wash machine cleansing the souls. And see, the same thing happens with religions. Religions are all over here about spirit, right? Purifying the soul. And science is all over here being linear, left brain, counting beans and looking at all the data. And we'll never figure this whole planet out. We'll become very advanced. There's no question about that. But we'll always end up ending back to spirit, because that's what we are. We're spirit having a physical experience.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. I
That's
love it.
always the final outcome. It can't go any other way, because that's the source.
Right.
Divinity.
That is the source. Yeah. That's what everything comes out of. And we say the good, the bad, and the ugly. And that's a question I've always had. Like, why is it the good, the bad, and the ugly? Why is all of this happening at once?
Well, again, I got to go back to the stories that are in all the great religions. And of course, the Western story we're all most familiar with here in the West is the Garden of Eden story, that the evil spirits actually took the spirit, and that's really my interpretation of the inside metaphor, was the demonics, or the snake, or whatever you want to say, Satan, however you want to interpret the story. And it's the same thing in the Vedantics, where we were spirit in the Garden of Eden, and we took on clothing. They were clothed. Well, what would that clothing be? I don't think it's from, Nordstrom's rack. I think it's the bodies. You see what I'm saying? It's the clothing is these physical, miraculous bodies. And when you look at AI right now and robotics, I mean, the dexterity we have in all of our five senses and the control of our body is stunning. I mean, watch just anyone watch a bird fly. I mean, creation did a pretty damn good job at wiring consciousness to these physical bodies. And it's pretty amazing. Science will tell you, well, we can move the fingers and the hands by cutting open your brain and probing in your gray matter of your brain. Okay, but what's making consciousness control that? I mean, dexterity that we've all been given to just walk across the room is stunning. I always am struck when I get around old people because now they've got the wisdom. And most of them will sit there and say, I got all this money, I've got all this stuff, but I'd give anything if I could get my youth back, if I could get my health back. If you're healthy, you are rich. You really are. Because I've seen people who are multi-millionaires, and they're sitting there crumpled up in the chair or on the bed, and they can't buy health. They can't buy that magic that was there in youth. Watch a little kid run, or a bird or an animal. It's stunning what the genetics in our bodies are. And the
So stunning.
demonics seek to always destroy that. This is really a planet where good and evil come together. They say the whole Yetziratic worlds is, again, where good and evil comes together. And I really believe that's true. It's right down to the molecular, and I think much deeper than that, than we even know how to measure, you know.
Yeah. Let's jump to a question here, Jeff. Miss Wilson is asking or saying, for example, how do the gentle, harmonious alignments in the draconic synastry chart resonate against the challenging, intense aspects found in the tropical synastry chart?
She's using draconian astrology.
Yeah.
Well, that's interesting. Not many people know about that. Yeah. Well, I have to say this. I'm always struck by the different techniques that are extant in all the different types of astrology. I've been crazy enough to study a lot of them. And the same thing exists in Vedic astrology. Most people are familiar with the doshas, but there's actually 32 plus systems in the doshas, and there's so many complex ways to analyze them. And I think these progressions, when I study this stuff, I've always said, okay, can I find some correlatable reality to it? And that stuff is really good. In fact, there's actually different fixed stars. Draco is one of them that you use. There's a lot of different secret zodiacs out there. And a lot of people have mentioned about Orphica, which is the 13th sign. And there's a lot of dissension about what that is. And that might be the center, believe it or not, of the galactic center of what we go around. So it's really interesting stuff. But yeah, there's a lot to that. And I would say that synastry, for anyone listening, what she's talking about is you're looking at geometric aspects to the birth chart. And you can do that in so many different ways. You can do that with progressions. Progressions are literally what I was speaking about before. A day equals a year. And there's a lot of ways to divide them. You have myriads of, well, I wouldn't say myriad, but you have at least close to 7 or 8 different types of progressions that are the major ones. And there's also annual perfections. And when you start adding in different reference points, Uranian astrology is another one that's very similar to draconian astrology. So these things are really using different reference points to look at the birth chart and progression. Same thing in Vedic astrology. Vedic astrology uses a whole other world. It's the lunar mansions that surround the Earth between the moon. And, a lot of people have said, there's a lot of people out there who said, the Earth is a trap for the soul. And there may be some truth to that. I think it's a little more divine than just this evil trap, but the evil spirits, I think, do feed off of our energy, and they do want us reincarnating. In fact, it's interesting to bring up Diddy and some of the stuff that we're hearing about, because in the news, what we get is a lot of surfacing from time to time. Look at Epstein, look at Diddy, and we hear other stories that surface about how there's this demonic cult that's really pervasive in politics and in people who are trafficking people. They're sex trafficking them. They're doing horrible things to children and sacrificing. This is not new. If you go back, I have documents that talk about how this was done to the cult of Baal in Israel, where they would literally beat drums so they could sacrifice their firstborn, and the drums were beating not so much for the energy, though that was part of it, but it's so the parents couldn't hear the children screaming when they sacrificed them. I mean, you think about this stuff. This is insane. This is demonic. There's no other words for it. And this stuff is going on still today. They're drugging people with horse tranquilizers and water and drinks. I mean, look at the stuff we heard about Bill Cosby, even though he's getting in and out of it. But the bottom line is, this is not something new. And these demonic forces are very pervasive here. I used to do forensics work, and I had, I think it was a sheriff. Yeah, it was a good friend of mine. He passed away. He told me, he says, Jeff, he said, we know that certain religious organizations have demonic gatherings. And I'm not here to bash any religions, but he said, because a lot of people in religions are great, and they really are. And I've met many of them. I've worked with them, and they're wonderful people, and they truly do believe in God. But there are some sects that is pretty scary what's going on, and anyone who doesn't want to look at this darker side is very, I think they're being blinded. The one thing I would tell you. Here, I got the gardener. Speaking of gardeners coming, and anyways, I had to close the window. But one of the things that I always loved about C.S. Lewis is, he would make that comparison between science and astrology. And he said a scientist will come along and say, well, water boils at exactly 212 degrees, right? And he then would come back with, I just wanted a cup of tea. And I always thought, well, that's the interesting thing that you were drawing about Krishnamurti before. If we just experience creation rather than always trying to categorize it and analyze it, we have a much more spiritual experience.
We
Not
sure
that
would.
science isn't good.
Yeah, no, but we sure would. And I feel like that's our true journey here. It
Yeah.
truly should be to experience in that way. But we're so locked into something that's the complete opposite. It's really crazy.
I personally, this is my personal belief from the little bit I've, looked at life, and we got to look at it. We're all like a myopic peek into our perception of reality. I don't think we're smart enough. I know I'm not, to figure out creation. We never will. It's divine and it's stunning. Just look at the sun, those videos I was showing before. I mean, the stuff that's going on. And that's why I do respect astronomy. When you look at all the stuff that's going on with the moons around Jupiter, what's it got, like 12 moons? I mean, it's exceedingly complex. So you can't, astrologers have to respect the science that's being discovered because it's really accurate. On the other hand, science will not respect the correlation to spirituality or energies on Earth from an astrological standpoint, though a lot do. I have run into many who do, but a lot don't. The science really divides humanity in some ways. It's been positive because it's brought us a lot of creature comforts and a lot of ease in the world. I mean, where would we be without computers? I just can't fathom how smart these people were, a couple of thousand years ago to do secondary progressions, solar arcs, and all the calculations they did with astrology or astronomy. And today I can do it at the click of a button and much more accurately with a computer. So, life has come a long way and I think that's the message of the Terminator movies, as long as we keep grounded and realize this is a very sacred place and technology is really truly what I would call a luxury, and that's what it is. It's a luxury to physical life,
Right.
but spirit will always come back.
Right.
We're going to end up back in the spiritual world. The biggest lie told to humanity is that we don't die. It's like, when you die, that's it. Everything's over. Well, it's over with for this experience, but we move on. And the evidence, if you do the research, is overwhelming, in my opinion, overwhelming.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think we all really, truly do know that. Like, we feel that in our core.
Not all of us. I
think
mean,
we
there's a
do.
lot of people that, they'll kill each other over money, sex, and power, and they
Oh, yeah.
will. And see, that's the demonic forces. I know. I used to do forensics work. I worked on one case. I couldn't believe it. Uh, the very wealthy husband had a beautiful young wife, and she fell in love with someone else. And they plotted, the wife and the boyfriend plotted to kill him. It was just like the movie Body Heat. It was exactly like that. I couldn't believe it. And I got the forensics evidence, and I'm listening to these tapes, and I'm going, these people, the guy actually took the husband deer hunting, the boyfriend, and tried to shoot him and missed. And finally, they staged a robbery, and he shot him. And then, of course, they were denying it, and they hired the attorneys trying to get out of it. But I mean, you think about this is where karma comes in, and the left brain linear technological world is all about comfort, security, and physical, well-being, which is important to be sure. But, the spiritual consequences of wanting to do anything to get to the top is horrible. And again, look at Diddy. The stuff is coming out that he did some really crazy stuff. There are lots of people coming forward who are saying there was potentially, children killed, just some horrible stuff. And this rabbit hole is going to go deep. And again, I wouldn't be surprised if they rub out Diddy like they did Epstein, even though I don't believe Epstein was fully killed. I think there's a lot of mystery surrounding that one. So
Mm.
go watch the movie sometime with Lauren Bacall and Humphrey Bogart called Dark Passage. What a great movie. He got cosmetic surgery and then he was able to escape. But
Yeah, that was a good one. That I love the
that
old
was a great
movies.
movie.
We both
What a
do. Yeah,
great movie
that
that
was a
was.
good
Yeah.
one. Let's jump to another question. This one coming from Rocky Stucci Jr. He always has such wonderful questions that I love. How do the saints or archangels in the Abrahamic, religions tie into astrology? Do they rule planets or oversee certain myriads of angelic beings?
Wow, that's a deep one.
No,
I think
I
when
love
you get
it.
into yeah, well, the planets themselves seem to be multi, you could say dimensional, meaning that they have good and evil in them. And it almost seems like truly this is a matrix of good and evil because a lot of people say, well, astrology, predicts the future and you don't have any free will. Oh, yes, you do. I think we totally have free will. And that's where the religions were right. Astrology, I've always, in my opinion, felt it is the energies that are coming at you. Again, traffic is a really good analogy. If you go to the grocery store, you are going to contend with every single other person on that road. And if somebody is outrunning the cops and runs a red light and smashes into you, you're going to deal with that, right? Let's hope that never happens to anyone. Or if it's a beautiful day and everybody's driving and getting along and stopping and paying attention, nothing happens, which is for the most part. So astrology is like that, where you're going to have cycles within your life that come at you. Well, back to his question, it really seems like there are some souls who come here who really have a lot of what they call evil elementals attached to them. In fact, we could talk about this subject all day. Let me show you this diagram. This is, again, a diagram that I use a lot. And I love this because what it shows here is, that's this one right here, that we end up trapped down in what they call the Yetziratic world. If anyone's familiar with the so-called Kabbalah, which is really ancient knowledge, that's what Kabbalah means. It means ancient knowledge. The Yetziratic world is where the heavens and the physical realm are believed to be. This is where space and time and dimensions of physicality concretize from spirit. And the evil spirits appear to be incarcerated in that. They're forced to do it by the upper angelic forces. So we've got good and evil mixing here. And it's interesting. I've had some really advanced people in astral travel and remote viewing. And in fact, I did a show not too long ago, and this guy said a really intelligent thing. He says, I think even if you went to other planets, we would still find some element of good and evil. And they say everything under the sun or suns, stars, or the universes itself will be born, it will grow, it will mature, it will atrophy, and it will die. Well, when you get back into all these angels, the lower, you got to remember there's hierarchies and hierarchies of angels. The upper angels are believed to be the seraphims, the cherubims, and the thrones. Now, people listening to this are going to say, yeah, but wait a minute, there's the Orphanum. Yes, there are different names for these, but there's very high angels up here. And then you have these major categories of the dominance, virtues, and powers. Some people call them different words. These are huge. I mean, there's 49 dimensions and 49 dimensions in each of these. This is meant to be the very upper angelic divinity. And it kind of matriculates down into more and more density is what's believed. The Yetziratic world is where this is where science is right. They're finding amino acids. They're finding all these different types of propagational waves that they haven't even come up with all the categories and names for yet. These energies. Again, I've always said physics cannot give you a definition to what energy is. We don't know what energy is. It comes in many forms. It's transmitted in many forms. It could be heat, kinetics, radio waves, microwaves, X waves, gamma waves, all these different things. It's a lot. And yet it's still energy. What it can transform energy into all different types of states, including they're talking now about how they've discovered the human body is really an electrical conduit with all these miraculous nerve synapses and brains and our muscles. It's stunning with the complexity of a physical body, whether you're an animal or a human or whatever, even a plant. It's all just energy that's been extremely organized into a functional, you could say, conscious transmitter to the physical world. It's beyond amazing. So all these angels, and I mean, we couldn't even begin to cover this in 3 hours. And even then, no one, including me or anyone else, knows enough to fully get this. But you have the 72 angels that are also mentioned in the Bible of Exodus, which are the quintessences of the zodiacs. And I do say that plurally because there's much more than one zodiac. And you also have the 24 wings of the wind. And what astrologers and astronomers, can't grab is how complex all this stuff is. And that's why there's so many different versions of astrology. And then you have the planets themselves. So you have the stars and all that exceedingly complex angelic combinations. Then you get into the solar system, which is the 9 planets, and of course the asteroids, if you want to include them, and a lot of other influences that are there. And Vedic astrology knew about all these shadow planets. And so does the West, too. The West has that, too. And these are mathematical points, like the moon's north and south nodes. The planets also have nodes. I mean, your eyeballs will cross when you just even try and assess what's going on, let alone study it and apply it. So it's really deep stuff. So all the planets appear to have both archangels, angels, spirits, and intelligences. They also have archdemons, demons, and intelligences and spirits. So they're like multi-dimensional switches. And, proof of that is when you look at astrology, quote unquote, you'll find that literally the planets can take on different energies. And this is where astrology really, really, really applies. See, watch. This is just, well, that's a different one. Let me find this other tree here. I think it's this one. Yeah, this one is just a real brief example. A lot of people ask me, can they get these charts? Well, I actually had to create these charts. I took them from many different, Manly P. Hill got me back into this and a few other people way back in the 80s. And that was studying the various hierarchicals on the tree of life. And a lot of people will say, oh, this is Kabbalah. Well, it is, but it's also very ancient, sacred knowledge of a way to put something that's infinitely complex into at least a relatable diagram. And that's about the best I can say about that. And you'll notice I don't have the sub-angel. See, if I zoom in on this, if I can, let me see if it lets me. There's a control here that allows me to zoom. Anyways, yeah, here it is. So if I zoom in a little bit, you'll see the archangel is Raphael. And see, right there, that's the archangelic being. But underneath that, there's an angel, because that's an archangel. Then underneath Raphael, there is a an angel, then there's a spirit and an intelligence. There's also an archdemon and a demon and a spirit and intelligence under that. And it's almost like you've got this extremely complex portal of dimensional transmission that actually interacts with our consciousness. That's why I say the universe is an interactive consciousness. And this is why you're always going to find a struggle between astrology, astronomy, and the religions, because the religions want us to focus on morality and being good. That's why I love the Magus of Strovolos, because he probably throws it up the middle the best way. And that is, you have thought form elementals that cling to the aura. And as a result, these become your auric field. Hence why you hear many people talk about how you become what you think about. And it's really true. There's a whole lot more to that. This is just the basics on the aura. Here, this is the one with the chakras. But what's really interesting is they say there's 5 layers to the aura. You have the physical body, you have the outer layer, and then you have that's called the etheric double by some, and then you have what they call the noetic or the psychic double, then the noetic double, and there's 2 beyond that. And this is where it seems that free will and consciousness interacts with the angelic hierarchies in not only the solar system, but the whole universe. I really believe consciousness is an interactive transmission between free will and karma. And a lot of people will say, yeah, but geez, why is astrology so accurate? And it is. That's because those energies are boomeranging back at us for good or for ill. And that's where you get into all these progressions and transits. And it's quite interesting how accurate it is. It's very complex, but you have to keep consciousness center of all this, because again, I have seen where people have really nasty transits and progressions. And if you become self-aware, which is very hard to do when you're in the middle of it, it really shifts you a lot. And
yeah, your camera's out, by the way,
I got
Jeff.
it. I got it. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
So yeah, if you become self-aware, it really makes a huge difference.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for that, Jeff. And thank you for this. I'm glad you were able to spend a little extra time today with us. And we'll be back on Monday. Thank you, everyone, for joining us so much. Have a beautiful day, a healthy day, and through the weekend. These energies that Jeff was speaking about at the top of the show are intense. So take good care of yourselves